video of this one though. I'm trying to make these lectures a little short. I was actually reading a study looking at how long you could get a student's attention span on average. The study was looking at, well, how long should lectures be? Anyone want to make a guess what the average attention span of a college student during a lecture is?
15.
It's a fair guess. 13 minutes. 13 minutes. So if you're all able to pay attention longer than that, you're high achievers.
Come on.
Kind of depends, right? All right, so the area we're talking about, we're jumping into talking about Southeast Asia. As you can see, Southeast Asia, the amount of land is actually smaller than most of the other regions that we've been looking at, but the actual amount of space that it covers is a much larger area of space. We have a couple different groupings. The readings kind of take us into looking at basically the area that is connected via land with the rest of Asia. Indonesia being one country, but a wide range of cultures and languages. Philippines is also kind of a larger range of culture and languages. Philippines having more of a similar colonial history that kind of unites it as a place. Indonesia, a different scenario. So when globalization, the first kind of global linkages in this region were trade, people looking for spices, and this was for quite a few years. This was the reason the British and the Dutch came in here, getting money for a number of different spice trades. We talked a little bit about tourism before, about tourism basically increasing through time. Our textbook talks about how Russian-born German artist created a lot of perceptions of the island at the time. And the book says this, but it doesn't include any pictures, so I looked up some pictures that I put on here. But in a nutshell, tourism has been coming here for a long time, and it's been coming with a specific, looking at let me look at this art here that I dug up. People who are tourists would come to this region wanting to see this, right? Wanting to see these kind of romanticized, exotic images, right? Small villages, rural lifestyles. Right, so these depictions were passed about in Europe for a good amount of time, and so that is one of the reasons why, if you remember from the readings, people have a certain pressure to kind of perform their own cultures, right? To kind of equate with these images. And this is something that kind of goes on all over the place, right? You'll see images of like maybe the cowboy West, right? That kind of glamorizes a certain story of certain people, right? The South too, obviously. All right, so places around the world have these same types of things that happen. Now, when people go there, of course, you have, a lot of modern conveniences, a lot of really wealthy hotel chains. I haven't been to these resorts, but I've been to similar resorts in the Caribbean and whatnot. And they're expensive, right? They're expensive for tourists, but also, although they do bring in some amount of money locally, most of the money made goes to the hotel chains, right? Locals, how much of that money is left in the local economy? Well, it depends. Like even things like food, a lot of food will be shipped in cans from the US because a lot of tourists want their kind of comfort foods that they're used to. Some food is purchased locally, and that's good for certain farmers who grow that food, of course, but also, wealthy tourists coming in and buying food, it pushes up the price of food, which again is good for farmers, but then that means, that's kind of taking a little bit of money out of the pocket of everybody else who also eats food, which would be everybody, right? Tourism is often seen as a double-edged sword because, it could bring in money, but often a lot of different places kind of don't want the international culture to kind of come in, because there's kinds of, well, lots of different things that happen with tourism that people don't want, right? This chapter talks quite a bit about human trafficking, right? Things like that. And so, well, some places they'll put in basically a little tourist district that will have a very separated, foreigners can go over here and live their kind of modern international lifestyles to keep people away from where everybody else is. It's one of those interesting things where, the tourists will come here seeing those artistic depictions or picturing a certain type of life, but then what they get, well, they'll get a little show of what the culture is like that is often just kind of, people put on that is not actually how they're living, and then the rest of their tourist time is spent in different ways that also locals are not living. Tourism, a concept that we've talked about in every chapter, but this chapter kind of takes the time to define it and a number of different things about tourism. Well, as it says, short-term travel for the purpose of recreation and relaxation. Interestingly, in this region, and in lots of regions around the world, the first tourists were people who were on pilgrimages, going to places, right? Because if you would go to a place, you of course would go there and spend money, and the local economies would often try to, take advantage of that, right? Egypt being one of the cases of a place that has literally had tourists for thousands of years, right? Other places, 500 to 1,000 years of tourists. The majority of tourists in this region do come from within the larger region. A lot of money, of course, comes from elsewhere, but a lot of local tourists. And when I say local, you have this term ASEAN. That's an umbrella term for basically an economic category that includes most of the area that we're talking about. Southeast Asia does not include like East Asia and some different places that we'll be looking at in the next chapter. But if you look at number of tourists, right? You have people who are tourists from within the region itself, and then within Asia even is a larger percentage, right? You see Australia, although Australia only has like 20 million people, you could see that they're known for being tourists and traveling. I've kind of talked about that before. So impacts of tourism, I mentioned before, 10% of tourists, what they spend benefit people in local tourist areas. And of course, that depends on the place. Some places it's going to be more, plenty of places it would be less. Actually, you guys answered some questions about this and did a pretty good job. Let's see. One kind of interesting thing in this region is, if you saw in that video, the roads were really bad in the area that they were looking at. And infrastructure like roads can be really expensive in places that, in this type of climate, you have a lot of rain, that the soils aren't you don't have a lot of bedrock that things are built on, and so you could have lots of landslides and things like that. We've also talked about this quite a bit before. Commodification in tourism. I believe one of the questions I had you guys work on was asking if it is possible to get an authentic experience as a tourist, just kind of ever. And I guess that really kind of depends on what a person is looking for, right? Depends on how it's defined. I believe most of your answers were that it's not really possible because money kind of corrupts in a way, right? People will do what they need to do, especially if you're visiting. If you're a tourist in an area that is poor, people will do what they can to get more of that tourist money, and very often that means doing a kind of show of culture. Commodification, I don't know if that's a term you guys have ever had in other classes. Commodification just means turning something that should be a human interaction between people into a financial interaction, right? And so, some people have said that kind of, in America, almost everything has been commodified, and it will use as an example, if you live in an older traditional society, maybe as you're starting your day, you'll interact with people and you'll greet them and ask them how they are, and you'll strike up a conversation about the weather or something else. Whereas the counterexample, they would say, well, in the U.S., what do? Well, you get up because you got to go to work. You stop to get some gas. Your interaction with that other human, and maybe all other humans for the rest of that day, is you go up to them and you say, I would like to pay you for your service. And they say, we'll pay you this much. And then you pay that much, and then you leave. You go on to the next person you're going to encounter. Well, you have a service that I want. I would like to pay for it. Same thing, right? Financial transactions, the majority of how you interact with other